everyone, today I'm going to show you how I made an underbust corset. I have a very simple method that I use. Firstly, I use a free online pattern from Foundations Revealed. So you will need to go on that website and follow the tutorial for how you can draft your pattern. If you follow every step, you'll end up with a corset that is like the one I have here, which is a denim corset that I made using that pattern. And today I'm going to be shortening that and turning it into an underbust corset pattern, which is quite easy to do. You should probably make a mock-up so that you know everything fits well. Secondly, you don't need any specialty equipment. I used regular fabric, cotton as lining, and also a floral cotton as the outer fabric or fashion fabric, and a strength layer made of twill from an IKEA curtain. And sometimes I also use denim, and that has worked very well as well. I use zip ties as boning. I find them very comfortable because I can't get steel or spiral steel boning here in my country, and I use a coat zip instead of a busk because I can't find corset busks. Now, I couldn't find a short enough coat zip for this corset, so I made the center front longer and left it unboned, so I'm folding it and tucking it out of the way. There's also another method, which is to shorten the zip and pull out the teeth that I don't need, and I may do that to modify this corset for it to have a shortened zip without the extra fold later on. That's an option I'm leaving open. I used two-piece eyelets, and it's very important to use two-piece eyelets because one-piece eyelets just won't do the job. They will come out and they'll scratch you, and they just aren't effective and lasting. So if you want your project to last, I definitely recommend using two-piece eyelets and trying to find them. This pattern has 5 pieces, so for each of those pieces I traced a new piece out of card and I shortened it, and I also made sure that piece 1, the side, matches 2 and 2 matches 3 and so forth. So this corset pattern was a bit of a pain to cut out because I had to cut out 5 pieces on each side times 3 layers, so that was 30 pieces to cut out in all. Each piece will have a seam allowance of 1 inch on all sides, and this is to ensure that I can adjust the pattern if need be, and I will also be able to sew boning channels using the excess left over after I've sewn the seams. Now I have all 5 pieces with the seam allowance, and I will get a pencil and I will use the original pattern piece to draw out my pattern shapes to make sure that everything I sew together is accurate. This does take some time. I will be sewing the corset together in 4 parts. I have the left and right sides, and each of those sides will have 2 parts. One will be the fashion layer, which is with the floral fabric, and the other is the lining layer together with the strength layer. So I'm sewing pieces 1 to 5 first of the fashion layer on the right side. Basically, I just need to pin piece 1 to piece 2 and sew it together, then piece 2 to 3 and sew together, and so forth. Now this is the center front piece, and this is the side piece. What I'm doing behind is I am folding this away from the center front, and I'm going to be sewing my boning channel using the excess fabric. So that's going to go there. That is going to be sewn like that to make the boning channels. And I think I might be able to squeeze 2 boning channels in each of these, but let's see. So what I found is that I had enough fabric to make 2 boning channels from the excess fabric and the seam allowance, and that is what I did. And for me, the boning channel just perfectly fits the zip ties if I follow the foot of my sewing machine, so that makes sewing corsets very easy for me. I also sewed extra boning channels into the strength layer, which I didn't end up using. Now for the right side, I have the front and back pieces sewn. As you can see, they match very well, but it does take a little bit of tweaking to make sure that they are perfectly matching, and even if they are not, it's still okay. Now I will be pinning the front and back layers together, right sides together, and sewing along the bottom and along the back of the corset. So the back where the lacing will be, that's where I'm going to be sewing them together. Before I sew the front and back layers together, I do need to trim the excess fabric from the seam allowances to reduce bulk. Even though I have sewn 2 boning channels, I still have quite a bit of excess fabric that I need to remove, and the easiest way to do that is with a pair of these zigzag scissors from IKEA. Now I need to pin the front and back layers together, trying to get the seam lines to correspond. It's okay if they don't match perfectly, but it is ideal to get them as close as possible, and also to make sure that the front and back pieces have similar seam allowances. After I've sewn the bottom of both layers together, I'm going to be trimming the excess, flipping it over to make sure that everything is okay before sewing the back. Here you can see that the back is sewn, so I'm flipping this half of the corset inside out, and I'm going to be working from the outside from now on. I'm going to be putting the coat zip in and sewing it to the back first, and then only to the front layer. The front layer needs to be very carefully pinned and placed, because I do want the fabric to slightly overlap the teeth of the zipper. Not too much and not too little. It's a little bit hard and tricky to do that, but with some practice I managed to make it so that the zip is hidden by the fabric. Now, preparing the boning is really easy. I'm just taking 2 zip ties per boning channel, cutting them to the length that I need, then using sandpaper to smooth out the sharp edges, and then inserting them inside the boning channels. And once you get the hang of it, it's really simple and straightforward. If you were using spiral steel boning or steel boning, it would take a little bit longer, but there are a lot of benefits to that as well. If you don't have access to that, zip ties work pretty okay from my experience. Because I cut an extra 1 inch around each pattern piece, I now have 1 extra inch on the top that I need to remove, but I'm only cutting it from the inside layer, which is the twill fabric and the lining. I am not cutting 1 inch away from the fashion fabric, the rose floral fabric. So don't cut away that inch from the floral fabric, because we will be using that to cover the seam, and folding it over and whip stitching it or leather stitching it down. This is what I do instead of having separate binding. I try to have binding included in the pattern itself, and you can do that for an underbust corset. In fact, I did that for the other denim corset that you saw earlier on as well. So I am just carefully folding over the front fashion fabric and whip stitching it down, and it does take some wrangling and it takes some time and some hand stitching, but for me it's very worth it because I only need to sew it once, rather than if I were to cut a bias strip and use that to bind the corset, I would need to sew it down twice. If you're patient, do it really nicely and slowly, but since this was the second last step and I really wanted to try this corset on, I just steamrolled right through it. At long last, it is now time to mark and punch my eyelet holes. I made them 1 inch apart and I punched them out using the smallest eyelet puncher I could find because I don't want to make the holes too big. Then I gradually extended the holes by poking my seam ripper through them, as well as very carefully screwing one side of a pair of scissors through them as well. Here we have my 2-part eyelets and my 2 eyelet tools. It's all a matter of positioning the pieces in the correct order and hammering it gently into place. Now, I did make a couple of mistakes and I had to pry out 2 eyelets with a pair of pliers because they didn't quite sit right, so it's okay, you know, it's part of the learning process. Now here's a little tip for you. I always lace my corsets over a pillow. This gives me the perfect lacing gap that I need to put the corset on later. And I'm using a special kind of lacing, leaving 2 loops right in the center where the smallest part of the waist is, and that will help me pull everything nice and tight and cinch the corset perfectly. Overall, I'm extremely pleased with how this corset looks. I love that I was able to use a free custom pattern, which is really helpful for me because I'm Asian sized and commercial patterns just don't fit my measurements very well. Now, I usually wear corsets as undergarments to give support or to give the right silhouette, but this one is pretty enough to wear like with a lace blouse and a lace skirt. It's kind of like Mary Poppins's holiday dress. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Feel free to comment with any questions you might have or suggestions. I'm always keen to learn new things. Now this one is slightly odd because there's an extra tab that I fold in, but once the corset is worn, you will hardly recognize or notice that. So if you like this video, do like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Bye!